Hello and happy Tuesday, which is of course my book reviews day, and today I would like to talk to you about The King Must Fall, a Grimdark Magazine Anthology featuring 19 tales of regicide, or something close to regicide, because they're not all necessarily hitting the mark directly on the head. This edition is the signed and numbered edition, which does have this nice slipcase. I will talk more about the details of this particular edition once I have talked about the stories themselves. So let's dive in, because I am going to try to touch upon all 19 stories within the collection. Regardless of what edition you buy, they all have this beautiful cover artwork by Felix Ortiz and interior artwork by Carlos Diaz. So this is published by Grimdark Magazine, so you are going in expecting grimdark short stories, and most of them do fall within that grimdark subgenre of fantasy, although there are some variances here and there. To start things off, you do have an introduction by Richard K. Morgan, who is kind of introducing you to the overall theme of The King Must Fall. The idea being that, well, there are those in power, and there are those who want that power for themselves, whether that king or queen or person in power has overstayed their welcome, grown power hungry, or just needs a nice little change of pace in the kingdom. These are stories about those kings falling. Some literal kings, some metaphorical kings. It could just be a person in power. But anyways, starting things off, you have What You Wish For by Devin Madson, a very strong starting point for the anthology. It reads, I don't want to give away the ending. I was going to say, there is a trilogy that isn't fantasy that this story very strongly reminds me of. I actually reviewed this trilogy last year. I'm not even going to say what that trilogy is, though, because doing so might spoil the story here of What You Wish For. Picture it like a grimdark Twilight Zone episode. You know, you have the people at the gates wanting to get in and take the power for themselves, but the king is doing everything for the good of the people, whether they believe it or not. It's a very strong start to the anthology. Next up is The Dark Sun by Luke Scull. I'm not going to lie, I hate to say it, but this to me was a very forgettable tale, quite literally. I read this anthology over the course of the last month, which is both a blessing and a curse with the anthologies like these, because you get little bite-sized short stories or larger novellas for some of the cases. And, well, this was read about 4 weeks ago, and it doesn't stand out in my mind. What You Wish For did stand out in my mind. It had a great twist. It had a great, powerful narrative, especially the ending. And the same can be said about Glory to the King by Anna Smith Spark. This one had some fanatic followers, but overall, I don't remember much about it, I'm sad to say. And I will gladly say that that's not the case with most of the short stories in here. I do remember most of them. It's just a couple of those early ones where it's, a little wavery. Next up is one of the longest tales in the collection. It's a nice novella-sized entry in this anthology, The Bookburner's Fall by Anthony Ryan. This apparently takes place within his larger world, which admittedly I haven't read too much Anthony Ryan. I read his Pilgrimage of Swords, but it's not the same world as this one. I mean, it's very, very powerful characters. I like the characters. Having read The Bookburner's Fall, I would want to dive in and read more of it. And thankfully, apparently, there's a whole world out there in which I can dive into. Next up, a short story, which is way too short for its own good, because I did not want this one to end. This is Mother Death by Michael R Fletcher, one of the short stories that is worth the price of admission alone. Now, I believe this takes place in a larger world as well, and this is such a great taste that, hot damn, I want to go read some Michael R. Fletcher after this. It's a world in which one's memories, one's soul, if you will, one's abilities can all be traced after death to an artifact. And this is a tale of revenge. It is a tale, it's first-person narration where you are Mother Death. And, well, it's a revenge tale. Your children have been killed, you want revenge, and you decide to take the trinkets, the souls, the memories, everything of those who have fallen around you, and you're going to encompass them to become an ultimate harbinger of death. And hot damn, this is like, it's heartbreak in a short story. It's like, picture, I mean, it reminded me slightly of I guess there were second-person chapters in that. The second-person chapters of N.K. Jemisin, with like the 5th season. Like, it's a character driven to a mother, driven to wit's end for revenge, and it is, wow. It could have been significantly longer than it was. I would have loved every minute of it. Next up, The Black Horse by Jeremy Zoll. This is your anthropomorphic grimdark story. It is your escort mission. You have the titular Black Horse, a mercenary who is given a task to help escort a prince, the last of his kind, a lizardine prince, to a destination to help kind of save the world. I'm not going to lie, if I found out that Jeremy Zoll had played The Last of Us prior to writing this short story, I wouldn't be surprised. Not that the world itself is inspired by The Last of Us, but there are elements to the story that are very heavily inspired, particularly the final act that I'm like, wow, okay, I mean, hey, it was done well. I can't complain there. Next up, we have Thrall by Lee Murray. This wasn't so much grimdark. This was very low fantasy. It was like fantasy of our world. You know, this is dealing upon actual real world mythology. In this case, it takes place in New Zealand, dealing with Selkies, which are mythological creatures who can change between man and seal by donning some magical seal skin. So it's a short story about a bunch of boys sailing the seas and going clubbing. Seal clubbing, that is. Anyways, they stumble upon a Selkie. Things take a turn for the worse. I like maritime fiction, with some nice little fantasy elements thrown in. Even though it's nothing like The Terror by Dan Simmons, if you like The Terror, you'll probably like Thrall. I will say, however, this is one of 2 short stories in the whole anthology that kind of branched away from the King Must Fall mentality, in my opinion. Lee Murray just had a really excellent Selkie story he wanted to tell, and he told it. I'm not going to complain, though. Solid short story. Next up, King for a Day by Daniel Polanski. This is your Mesoamerican, kind of Mayan, Aztecian fantasy tale, where the rights to be the king comes down to a single trinket. And this is the story of that trinket being passed from hand to hand, from person to person, as each person fights for their chance to be king for a day. Nice, decent short story. I don't think it's part of a larger world, but I can definitely see with Polanski's world building if he had more of stories to tell within this Mesoamerican empire. Next up is The King Killing Queen by Sean Speakman. This was actually my introduction to the whole anthology. I am a big supporter of Sean Speakman and Grim Oak Press, and I had heard that he had a short story in this collection back when the Kickstarter was going on. So I was like, well, I'm going to support it. A few weeks ago, I did do a full book review for The King Killing Queen. I did want to read this, well, more of a novella, not even a short story, the novella that inspired it. And I don't know if inspired it's the right word. It is quite literally part 1 of the novel. So if you've read the full King Killing Queen by Sean Speakman, you don't need to read the short story. You already know what's going to happen. It's basically up to the point where Sylvie goes on her quest. You know, it's the part where she takes matters into her own hands in a very George R. R. Martin way. And that I forgot to mention that in the full book review. There is a murder, a death that occurs in this short story and in the novel that is quite literally just ripped straight from George R. R. Martin's pages. And I'm like, oh, I've read that before. No criticism there. I mean, there's only so many stories in the world. You want to be able to tell so many tales in the world. Sean Speakman kind of makes it his own. I will say it works really well as a novella. I mean, it leaves kind of a cliffhanger ending. But I would say that the best part of the novel is what you get within this short story. So if you do read the short story and you're like, wow, I want more, then you can check out the full-length novel, The King Killing Queen. But as I said, if you've already read The King Killing Queen, you can honestly skip this short story because there's actually, I mean, it's quite literally page for page, the part 1. However, I will say it is expanded more in the full novel. Like it starts off with, I think it's like chapter 2 in the novel is where this short story starts off. But, you know, it's not a bad tale. It's just, I had already read it. But like I said, if you haven't read it, then hey, check it out. Next up, The Face of the King by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This is, in my opinion, the best short story in this collection. I mean, there are a lot of good ones. I loved What You Wish For. I loved Mother Death. I loved the 23rd Canton, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this one right here is worth the price of admission alone. It is a kingdom in which everyone knows the king based on his mask. They don't know what the king actually looks like. First of all, it is the gutsiest of all the short stories in the collection because it is told in second person. You are the protagonist. It's telling what you are doing, and you are doing this. You survive an assassination attempt, and you are thrown down a well. And you, upon having survived, decide you want to go get your throne back. And it is such a good short story. Such a great twist, and man, like I said, it is the best of the collection. I don't believe you can read this anywhere outside of this anthology, but if you can, you need to check out The Face of the King by Adrian Tchaikovsky. The Hand of the Artist. This deals with a very interesting use of magic. It is a world in which magic exists. It is the story of a elderly artist reflecting upon her time of being brought in to paint a portrait for the king. The king is notorious for having his way with all of the women that have come into this castle. So you're a little nervous. The main character's a little nervous going in. But it was a very interesting use of magic and a very, very good tale. Another one of my favorites from the collection here is The Conspiracy Against the 23rd Canton by Alex Marshall. As far as I can tell, this isn't part of a literary world that he's created, but it should be. Damn it, Alex Marshall, I need more. Like, this is, first of all, it's like Eastern influenced fantasy. I love the world building, all within this short story. It tells the story of the heiress to the throne, who doesn't want to be the heiress to the throne. So she, her father is dying, and so she wanders outside the castle to try to find a magical solution to her issues. And she does find a magical solution to her issues, and it's really good. It's such fun world building, such fun characters within it, particularly one, I'm not going to say who the character is, but the one who is offering a solution to the problem that the protagonist has. But like I said, I wanted more of it. There's literally, it jumps ahead years, decades near the end. And it literally sums up by saying within that interim, within that time frame, it goes, there are other stories that happen in here before you get to the conclusion for this tale, but those are for another time. And I'm like, no, Alex Marshall, I want them now. I want to know more about this world. I want to know more about Vumi's adventures. It's good. Also, it has two aspects to it that are just done so casually that I have to applaud it. One actually has to do with the main character being a transgender character, which you don't really see a lot of necessarily transgender characters in fantasy. I mean, I have a transgender friend, so it's really cool. I want to recommend the story to them. It's cool to see such a character be front and center. Second aspect is the most casual cannibalism ever. Like, hot damn, it's part of their life. It's part of a ritual in this story. And you're just like, okay, I love the way it just drops that bombshell on you. I don't really think that's a spoiler. It's a cultural thing, Next up, The Blade Queen and the Stoneheart by Anna Stevens. These are all grimdark fantasy stories, mostly. This is the one that borders on horror. The titular Blade Queen has a very horrific way of, bringing on future generations. She's not human. I mean, you can see she's kind of got some creepy stuff going on here in Carlos Diaz's image. And her reproductive methods are kind of horrifying. If you've seen James Gunn's Slither, then you're like, okay, I know what I'm in for. It's crazy. The Stoneheart is a mercenary hired to take down the Blade Queen. I don't know if this is part of a larger world, but I would absolutely read it if it is. Next up, The Day the Gods Went Silent by Justin T. Call. This is the heist novella in the anthology. It kind of alternates between multiple point of views, but primarily it alternates between the heir to the throne, who is going to become a god king, and the Shit Squad, the ragtag group of rebels who are hired to steal, in this coronation ceremony, the holy and royal artifacts. It was solid. I mean, I liked it. It felt like it was almost like a prologue to a larger novel, just like The King Killing Queen is. So I wouldn't be surprised. I unfortunately did not do my research. I would not be surprised if Justin T. Call had expanded this, or if this was introduction to a larger world. It would work really well. And I would certainly read it. Next up, unfortunately, is the weakest short story in the whole collection. This is A Piece of Movable Type by Peter Orullian. He is going the route of a historical fantasy short story. It's not really grimdark per se. I mean, the most grim part about it is the time, the Holy Roman Empire and Charlemagne. It is the story of the printing press, and it's after a lot of stories of high fantasy, it's a little disappointing to read. I hate to say. I mean, it's not bad. It's just bad in comparison. Next up, The Wizard in the Tower by Cameron Hurley. This is actually, believe it or not, has elements of fantasy romance in it, and it's done really well. This is the story of, well, there's a witch who is the king in this story. She's the powerful one who needs to fall. And one of her minions, the body stealer, who is the protagonist of this, he is a body stealer in more ways than one, is sent on a quest to retrieve a body. The body happens to be very much still alive. And, well, there's a relationship that builds between them. And it is actually very touching. It's another one where you're going to jump ahead many years over the course of the story. And I'm thinking, no, Cameron Hurley, I want more. I want like a fully fleshed out like novel in this world, if it doesn't already exist. If it does, I apologize. I'm going to go check it out. But wow, like I wasn't expecting a little bit of romance in this, but it was done exceptionally well. Next up, you have The Varkalak by Matthew Ward, a good old hunting of the beast, a good old fighting of the beast story, a brutal grimdark story. Let's all play werewolf, if you will. I enjoyed it. Next up, On Wings of Song by Deborah A. Wolfe. This is a magical story of a bard. A story of two bards, really. One is Lily, or Lil, who is the descendant of gods and man. She is, she has some magic flowing in her blood, and she is trying to enter a competition where she can sing her song. And, well, there's a little bit of backstabbing, as one would expect within the world. And this is very similar to The Face of the King, is the story of Lil trying to work her way back up to get that revenge. It's done incredibly well, and it is full of very powerful characters. And then finally, we have The Last Days of Old Sharakai by Bradley P. Bulio, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yeah, this one is disappointing, but not in the same way that Peter Orullian's was disappointing. His was disappointing because it was just a weaker short story. Like thematically, it was weaker than the rest. This one is disappointing because I feel like I'm getting pushed into the deep end. This feels like the epilogue of a larger work. And then this one I did have to look up online. It turns out I'm right. This is the epilogue for another work. The author has written Sharakai novels, and this is like part 6 of the Sharakai novels. This is like the conclusion, which, I mean, it does. I mean, it's not like it's going to throw you in and not introduce the characters that are there. But clearly there's a vast history and all these actions that occurred prior to this novel, which, I mean, that can be said of any fantasy novel. Most of them use it as world building. This one uses it as, hey, you're coming in the last act and you missed all that other stuff prior. So, I mean, yeah, the writing is very well done. I enjoyed it. I wouldn't mind reading the Sharakai novels. I unfortunately know how everything ends because I've now read The Last Days of Old Sharakai. I mean, the title quite literally gives it away. And for that, I am a little disappointed. And then finally, I mean, it was a pretty lengthy novella, though. I mean, for fans of the Sharakai series, I'm sure you've already read this. Or if you haven't, you're going to love it. Followed the head up with a postscript by editor Adrian Collins talking about the idea behind this. It was actually Bradley P. Beaulieu, who did Old Sharakai, who did the idea of this as a theme. I will say, and then it has all these backers in the back, acknowledgments from all the Kickstarter backers. Yeah, I'm right there. I was gonna say, as I was flipping through this, I don't know where in here I am. It is broken down by the tier in which you supported, but within each tier, I can't tell how it's organized. It's not alphabetically by first name or last name. It just seems to be a random order. Maybe it's the order in which they backed the project. But anyways, that was not planned, finding my name in there. It just happened right there. This is literally the first time I've seen my name in the acknowledgments. When I was flipping through it earlier, I wasn't going line by line, and I was like, wow, that's cool. So anyways, that is The King Must Fall, a nice anthology from Grimdark Magazine. This, as I said, is the numbered edition, which was limited to 100 copies. I believe it's all sold out. It is signed by all 19 of the authors. Oddly enough, not signed by the editors. It's also not signed by Morgan, the introductory author, but that's fine. Nor is it signed by the artists. Just strictly the authors, keeping it plain and bare bones there. That's not a problem, though. As I said, I believe this signed and numbered edition is completely sold out, but it is available in both a trade hardcover and a paperback, as well as ebook and audiobook and whatever kind of style book you want. So you can find copies out there. I should have checked beforehand, but I know Sean Speakman, who I mentioned earlier, who runs Grimdark Press, he also runs the signed page. He had copies on the signed page that were signed by a handful of authors, including himself. It wasn't signed by all of them, but it was signed by a handful of them. I don't know if it was still available because I forgot to check it. But if it is, there'll be a link in the description below. Either way, there's a link in the description below to Grimdark Magazine, where I believe you can buy the trade editions that are not signed by anybody. You won't get the fancy slipcase or the signature page, but hey, you still get 19 Grimdark tales, or mostly Grimdark tales, some kind of aren't quite Grimdark. Looking at you, Peter Orullian. But yeah, I mean, the sum of its parts, it is well worth the price. You are getting 19 short stories here. Some of them, unfortunately, don't quite stand on their own. Looking at you, Sharakai, being the conclusion to a broader series. But there are several in there, including Tchaikovsky, including Mother Death, Fletcher's Mother Death, including the first tale, What You Wish For, that I think make up for the price of admission alone. Like, it's well worth it for just those. And then you get all these other bonus short stories thrown in. One of the nice things about this anthology is that you can just kind of dive in and read it. You know, you read it over the course of the month like I did. You know, you do you. But seriously, King Must Fall, definitely worth checking out. I know that Grimdark Magazine has done several other anthologies. The only one that I've purchased is Evil is a Matter of Perspective, which I've read several of the short stories in that. I haven't read the whole thing. I did not get the numbered edition of that. It had long sold out before I had heard of it. But I'm so impressed with this anthology that the next time Grimdark decides to do a Kickstarter, I'm definitely going to support them and give them backing. So seriously, check out Grimdark Magazine. Check out the signed page. They might have copies still on there. Thank you very much for watching. I do at least one book review a week, plus plenty of unboxing videos in between here and there. So please consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll see you around next time.